Hello, my name is Leon Dean. This presentation is a reflection of some of the things that influenced me to take a wildlife management course. Giving much thought to why I chose to study wildlife management caused me to recall what could be key events in my childhood. More recently, other influences have been prominent as well, including previous coursework. With many courses to choose from to satisfy degree requirements, I considered and reconsidered wildlife management on several occasions before electing to take the course. In the end, I realized that wildlife is facing the same pressures as humans, including humans. Early exposure to nature and wildlife on a rural farm gave me an appreciation for nature. The efforts of everyone were of little consequence if nature did not also cooperate. I learned a lot about insects, pollination, groundworms, and other biotics that interacted with the soil and the crops. We also did a fair amount of hunting, and through that I learned about the jobs or professions of various animals. My elders were always adamant about taking only what we needed from the forest. My grandfather was not highly educated, but it seems to me now that he had a lot in common with Aldo Leopold. He would point out animals and tell me what they did. Even when we came upon a rattlesnake, he explained that it should not be killed just for the fact it's venomous. He said that it had a job to do, and it was kind enough to warn us that it was there and had no quarry with us, and we should not have one with it. Rattlesnakes, he said, are predators and prey, and part of the balance in nature. He told me that just because you fear something or do not understand it does not mean you should destroy it. As a teenager, my family had moved to Florida, and we had a small cattle ranch. It was during this time that I began to see how animals were valued by humans. The domesticated animals had a utilitarian value and helped to accomplish the work. Our dogs had jobs, our horses had jobs, our goats had jobs, and even the cats had jobs. The goats kept the brush down and were alarms to predators. One of the goats, Lucy, she also subcontracted with the security detail. She was quite territorial and seemed only to fear a panther and, oddly, sandhill cranes. The cats kept snakes and mice out of the barn. Animals that were a food or income source had their obvious value. Next, wildlife that could be harvested were of value as food source, and the rest were tolerated unless they threatened one of the other categories of animals or humans. We really didn't need to hunt anymore, so my experience with the outdoors and wildlife became more interactive as an observer. I'm also guilty of feeding wildlife during this time. It just seemed to me that we had enough for ourselves and our domestic animals, so it just felt good and right to pass it along. I began to wonder why cranes, eagles, bears, panthers, and other wildlife were just simply disappearing in Florida. I wondered why people were hunting since America had so much food. It would take some years to learn that habit erosion and pollution far exceeded hunting methodologies with regards to the disappearing animals. During these same years, a woman came out with one of the cowhands to check our cattle for disease. It seemed like a great job to me, working with animals. She had a lot of knowledge and worked for the state. I felt comfortable enough to explain a problem to her. The fish in our half-acre pond had been disappearing, and I had seen an otter coming to and from the adjacent swamp. I thought it may be a good idea to trap it and move it, and wanted to know how the state dealt with these things. She said that the otter probably had a family, or there were other otters in the swamp, so I should be prepared to trap and move all of them. In fact, she said the only reason the otter was taking the fish out of the pond was that its habitat was disturbed, and there was no way an otter would travel for a half mile across an open pasture unless it had no other choice. On the positive side, she said the bass in a man-made pond would eventually wipe out the smaller fish, and the otter was probably helping to keep that balance in check. The problem, as it turns out, was that the swamp had been dried up from 3 feet of mean water in the lowest area and become a pasty mud. The orange grove owner behind us was using the ground and surface water to irrigate. It had been a dry year. Our pond had lost almost 2 feet of water. It contributed also to the lack of rain. Of course, the adjacent property owners, my father and the adults, took action on the water issue. My point of learning was the impact that something seemed so insignificant, that was the irrigation. It just seemed normal, but it had a big impact on the wildlife. When I was considering graduate programs and prior to applying for the Environmental Policy Graduate Program, I happened to watch a public broadcasting service, PBS, show about the beavers. It reminded me of my grandfather's statement that everything has a job. I learned from this show, Leave It to Beavers, that the beaver had been decimated by fur trappers to near extinction. Others had and continued to be killed because they interrupted roadway sewers, farming, and other human activities. They seem to have went from a high economic value to no value once synthetics replaced the disappearing beaver. I was so amazed at how this tiny animal impacted ecology. In one case, beavers were imported to a dry area that once had a large stream and wetland. The beavers began their work with a trickle of water and soon had an entire ecosystem where birds and deer and trees had returned. It was as if the beavers made water. It caused me to consider what other animals contribute and how, when managed, we can not only learn to live with them, but also benefit, as do they. Now that's what I consider a solution. Often I've been at odds with the religious lines and imply humans are to subdue the earth. It has been my position that even if those passages in the Bible were true, they were only true prior to what some refer to as the fall of man, that is, after the departure from Eden. Humans are left to live among nature and labor for their food. We were at that point no better and of no greater value than other creatures. Since we are not rulers, we haven't the right to bestow mercy on nature because that implies we are the masters of it. Although Leopold writes that there is no place here for mercy, only care, love, and respect. I see wildlife management as an opportunity to understand wildlife, protect it, and manage it with hope that its value to humans can be recognized before it is lost. That value may be a contribution to an ecosystem, but humans live from the services of those, so we must remember that everything has a job.